So there's all these layers in the individual work. And if this isn't where you're going, let me know. But what I've been thinking about, I see glimpses that, each work is going to be a standalone, but also a piece of, they're going to bring 30 or 40 layers to the table for a bigger conceptual work. And I keep researching this. I haven't found it yet, but, I see a work of, maybe over 20 years, 5 pieces, 10 pieces a year. It doesn't matter where they are, but collectors are sort of stewards and they hold them, and then they get brought together different ways, or maybe even just thought of all together. How best to say it? I tend to see things differently. People have been telling me that for 8 years now. I tend to just see things a little bit oddly. And that may be useful. It may not be. But if it turns out it is, it looks like there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands of layers. Let's do the math. I'm not going to do the math. 20 times 30 times 100, all those layers coming together. And I think that's how I'm starting to work. And I don't see a downside to it. It doesn't seem like a sellout. It doesn't seem like it may have been done before. I don't want to copy anybody. So I'm still researching that. But that's about where things have been and where I am. And I think the last part of your question was, why do I do things so big?
Yes.
I do things so big because I'm not nervous on the stage. My hand shakes. My hand shakes from 20 years of lithium at a serious enough amount that my hand has the tremors that will occur if you take enough lithium over time. And so if you look closely at how I paint, when I paint the big pieces that have what look to be close to perfect lettering, there are special brushes that I cut a special way. I hold my hand a special way, and I go very slow, about an hour a letter. And you'll see different indentations, the pressure in, pressure out, the side to side. I can't do below 3 inches at this point. I can't, what's the old thing when you're 3 years old, stay within the lines? I can't stay within the lines. So now we're about 3 inches, that's down from 4 a year and a half ago. I'll be able to keep it. I think my doctor says it's plateaued at this point, that tremors don't get worse. I will not be doing 10-foot lettering. But that's how it goes.
No, thank you. I mean, I think that's an important part of how your work comes out. And then Chris, so we've kind of talked about the ways that you guys work and how different it can be, but there are definitely similarities in terms of layers, as Adam brought up, and you have a lot of layering and erasure in your work, which is like translated through not just this project, but multiple projects before. I also think it might be kind of fun for you to talk about like time and location, and maybe a little bit about the ice, the ice houses, freezing.
Oh, sure. Yeah, a lot of the work does deal with it's challenging a surface or challenging a piece of architecture. A lot of the work I'll build architecture to scale, like a 1-to-1 scale. There was a project I did where I built a Marcel Breuer home to scale. That's a Marcel Breuer small house that's located a couple miles from my studio, and brought it downtown St. Paul and burned it down for a festival. That way of challenging it. Or a shotgun house from New Orleans, built a replica in my backyard and froze it and shot a video inside that. Or taking a 2-story typical Midwestern home and floating it on a lake in northern Wisconsin and shooting a video in there. And it's about the idea of like challenging permanence, as we think of like architecture as something that's permanent, that maybe in these ways of either challenging it with nature or action of cause and effect, that we can look at maybe architecture as something more fluid. And I think that's what my investigations have taken place. The factory that I was working in, it was so, I guess, set in those 50 years that it was open. And it's like how to engage with a space like that had so much 50 years of heavy labor and production. And as an artist, how do I examine a space in a history that's not my own? Because it's a tough history, right? I come from a place of privilege in the Twin Cities, coming down to a small town where medium income's about 16,000, and me looking at the lives of these people. But after spending that year and a half with the people, there's still a factory above me that still sews, and they sew for the U.S. government, Department of Defense. And I got to know them, and I got to know the history of them, that when they worked in the space and what that felt like. And there was a lot of commonality just in terms of, I guess, labor and production and repetition there's a lot of crossover between the artist and the seamstress. And so it was those conversations that became valuable in what came out of the production of these new works.
What is it about? What is it about these really large scale like projects that you take on that's so interesting to you? Is it all the individual components, or is it the challenge of moving a house, burning it down, or freezing it? Like, what is it that really drives at that?
Part of it, after I graduated, moved back to the Twin Cities. This is 91. This is when the art market, I guess, fell apart at different times. And I went to a gallery. Okay, I'll reverse a little bit. I was invited back to teach at Yale for a year. So I went back. And so it was that time I started going to New York and we showed 35 millimeter slides to galleries. And the stuff that I was doing, it was larger scale. And they looked at it and they were like, we can't do anything with this. And I think moving back to Twin Cities, like, okay, if I can't sell these things, I'm going to experiment, work in large scale and work in more of like a theater production, right? Where if it goes up, you view it, it's an installation, and then it comes down. And I think that's what drove me and it still drives me.
Why is it important to engage with living young artists?
Well, my personal opinion is that what makes a great collector and what keeps people collecting in a real active way is curiosity. And so anybody can have that. There are different ways of collecting. Obviously, some people go through consultants only. Some people are more involved in it. Neither one is better or worse. But I do think one thing that you get from emerging or living artists is much like Adam described. Actually, you get to take a quote unquote stake in that person's career. And it's not just a one-way street. I actually think it's a two-way street. I think to be able to see where someone's going. We know collectors in Minneapolis, right? They were buying Warhols at $5,000, So at that time, Warhol was not Warhol. He was more of an emerging living artist. And so I think there are just different things you can get from that. It depends on how much you want to be engaged in that whole process. But I do think that so much comes back to you when you know what that artist's doing. You can follow what they're doing. You can participate in that career. It's just a kind of a different way to go about it. And I personally, that's why I'm here, I find it really rewarding to play that role in their career. And so as collectors, you can choose to do that too.
And I might just add that Jennifer and I met, we were on a board in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. And she was the smartest one in the room. And when she took over this gallery, I was like, what are you doing? And I'm thankful that you have done that, really, because you brought some incredible, well, it's true. You brought some incredible artists to the fore that people wouldn't otherwise know. Okay, who's got more questions? Come on. All right. Sarah.
This microphone. So we talk a lot in these kinds of forums about how you can identify an artist that you'd like to acquire work from. But I'm always curious to know, from the perspective of the artist and the gallerist, who are the collectors that you look to work with, and what makes a good collector, and what makes a collector who needs to learn how to collect better?
Well, I guess I'll speak as a gallerist, and then you guys can talk about that too. It's a small world, right? And the art world is very small. So we know who certain people are. We know who certain collectors are and what collections are wonderful to be in. But we don't parcel things out. I love working with new collectors. I love educating people, like I said. So I think what makes a great collector is what I touched on before, is someone that is curious and is engaged and cares. This is an unregulated market. So like any market, I'm sure there are investment people out here that know a lot more about that than I do. But, it's built on trust. And I think it's really important to trust the gallerists or artists or art advisors that you work with, because we're the front line, and we've also done a lot of homework for you. There are certain, things you have to, have accomplished, or certain things that hurdles to get over as an artist to come into our program. And I'm not saying that we will absolutely work with artists, emerging ones that are just freshly out of school. We just did a show with one because I can tell she really has something going on. And so I'll work with her and I'll consult with her. And so, again, it's really more that I think is really important. So hopefully that answered it. What do you?
I mean, that's the hope when you make the work that it finds a home, or whether it be a collector or museum. And it's such a compliment that it resonated with somebody out in the world. And it makes it, as a younger artist, Beth is here and purchased a couple of pieces of my work. And it was such a huge lift to have that happen. And it made such a huge difference just in terms of the production of my studio. And it allowed me not to have a job for a good 4 to 5 months, which is so important. I mean, that's the goal. It's like to try to figure out how to do this and not do the other thing, right? And so little, 1 piece, 2 piece, it makes a huge difference.
Both artists have talked about their bodies of work, and I'm wondering what creates longevity and what makes your piece ethereal, that you recognize that something you've done is something that's timeless.
Shall I go? I appreciate you asking that, because I think that's a question that's got to. Thank you. I forgot that it works. I think it's an important question, and it's one that I ask myself a lot, because that's, to me, one of the bellwethers. And I was watching something on the flight down from Maine, and the basic thrust was, one of the ways you can tell someone has legs is if they're doing lots of different stuff in different mediums about a bunch of different things, and not just doing the one-trick pony thing. And I think I could slice and dice that concept a bunch of different ways in terms of, subject matter, medium, so you name it. There's at least 14, 15. But I think what it really comes down to is, how does it affect somebody, at least what I've seen so far. So the first time I did something and offhand on my phone, someone saw it and cried, I knew I had hit them. And it was words. It was just raw words. It was no beautiful image. It was black and white. 60 words, I think, maybe 50. And they cried at the end. And then about 2 months later, someone else cried on the same work. And I roughly did the math. I'm like, that's 2 people out of maybe 50 that have seen this. They have nothing else in common. You name it. They didn't fit the same profile. I'm like, that's heading towards universality. That's heading towards something that's got, whatever it is, that's the thing you're asking about.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could share any insights on what may be next, what you're working on, and some of the influences that bring this to life for you both.
My projects they are long-term projects, and I'm going on 4 years with this one. And I think there's more in this. There's years more. There are tangents that I'll go off on and do other things for other shows, but I think this has been, I think I'm in the moment right now. And I haven't exhausted it yet.
Yeah, I really think it's actually become a huge part of you. And so, I mean, just to add a little context to that, and I'm trying to shamelessly promote, but his show is coming up in April. And so there's been so much energy in this and around us for so long that I think it's almost hard to think past that. But as working with you, I can definitely see other things morphing out of it. But this is just you're in the thick of it, so it's probably hard for you to think much past it. I don't know. It kind of seems like it, but Adam,
if you don't mind, may I have the question one more time?
What's coming up? Yeah, what's coming up?
Oh, and the influences. The influence. Thank you. Yes. Okay. What's coming up is I am honestly very lucky to be. I did it again. That's 0 for 2. I'm very lucky to be with a gallery of this caliber. This has been wonderful as a chance, and I'm not just saying that, but the reality is I've been nurtured. I have been given complete artistic freedom. I pushed the boundaries on my first show last year. I don't do things that are graphic or sexual. I have 2 teenagers. I don't cross certain lines on purpose, but I push First Amendment boundaries, and I got nothing but support. I pushed them on purpose to see what I would get, to see what the limits were. There were not limits. I don't think I've told you this. That spoke. As a lawyer, First Amendment rights are very important. So, but where their things are going and what's next, I find myself being influenced by all the great text artists but also anybody that anyone is kind enough to tell me about. So people give me a lot of tips pretty often about who I should think about or look into. And the minute I do, I really love them. But then I don't know if I'm allowed to, but I start to say, you know what? That's not exactly all of it. I would like to try more or change it that way or blend these two or these three. So I find myself doing a lot of split hybrids at this point and thinking about how 5 people go together. So Ruche plus Barbara Kruger plus Jenny Holzer plus, well, Christopher is different. He looks different, but then add, Sugimoto for those horizon lines in the sea. The first time someone told me there was a Sugimoto, I was like, really? I was embarrassed. I didn't know. I'm often embarrassed, but I just have to. So I think to answer your question, it's all the influencers just keep heading in those directions in ways I don't really know. I'm just going to try and keep following.
For me, art is it is a deep relationship, and when it's a good question of like what's next, but it's kind of I'm in a relationship right now that's so deep that I can't see the next thing coming yet, but I'm so deep in that one. So
And that's a good thing too.
Hi, I have a non-for-profit in New York, and we're not a commercial gallery, but we have a beautiful gallery, and artists often come to me and say, how much do I charge for this? I really don't like to advise artists myself what they're worth and how much it costs them to make a piece and what their history is in selling. So how do you come up with prices?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? So I have I think all of us like gallerists have some sort of method that we work off of. Mine is sort of rudimentary, and it's not a steadfast, but when I'm looking at Chris or Adam or anyone else's work that's like go on a wall, sculpture is a little bit different. We start off with a baseline of a price per square inch. And what does that mean? And so it sounds kind of cold, but that gives me the ability to say, okay, so when you're growing in your career, we know how you're growing, and we know at this size, this makes sense. And I can justify that. So I will give an example. There is an artist that we've worked with, and he's worked with multiple galleries, and he's worked with ours, and we had him priced at one level. This other gallery put him out at another level. And I called him up and I said, you are just destroying your market right now. Because even if you sell at that, everything that's sitting here or anyplace else is underwater. You're not going to beat that. So I think we really focus on getting these, I kind of refer to them as like tentacles out. Like I'm very conservative in terms of movement, and movement happens in price when things have sold and things stay on walls, right? I'm not a fan of this vertical trajectory without a foundation under it, because that follows along and it's hard, and it's really hard to recover from. So we take very good care to make sure that we're making incremental steps and that our things are staying on people's walls. I hope that answers it. Sort of. It's hard. I mean, I've talked at SAIC grad students, and we were trying to counsel them on how to do this. And I was with a couple other galleries. And so we all have different opinions. But I think if you're under the care of someone that's working incrementally, it's the most important thing. You don't want something that just shoots up and winds up at auction.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you to Adam and Chris and Jennifer. And if you're joining us at table 26, we're going to head over there now. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.